might be listening to the recording of this. I hope everyone's okay for this to be recorded, so that anyone who can't make it this evening can still benefit. It's great to see people who were able to join us at our inaugural meeting, where you saw my amazing collection of handbags behind me in the bedroom. It's really good to see people for whom this is the first time, so you're very welcome. Especially warm welcome to the Richmond ladies and to anybody from Middlesex who's joining us. No boundaries here. Laura, I'm sorry, I'm going to embarrass you slightly and just say congratulations on your 300th year. That is quite some milestone, and I'm really pleased that everybody's here to celebrate with you. And this network is really quite a lot about celebrating, as well as being about inspiring. It's about helping you with your ambitions, wherever they are in this game. But it's also about perhaps helping you discover ambitions you didn't know you had until you sat next to somebody who told you what they do. And really, this came about because of the RFU's commitment to diversity and inclusion. And I have to say, since I've been involved with the RFU, and that's 2.5 years now on council and nearly 2 years on the board, their commitment has been unswerving, absolutely rock solid, even through the worst times of COVID, when there was an awful lot of tough decisions having to be made about where money was going to be spent. There was never any backing off. And even when it came to some really tough decisions to be made about board appointments, the RFU have really stumped up. And I have to say, here in Surrey, I thought, well, we can do our bit as well. Because one of the things that I'm quite passionate about is finding women that can do the sort of things that I've got such a lot of pleasure out of. So I started in rugby as a referee, thought it was fantastic, really got a lot out of that. I then moved on to do disciplinary panels, and then I joined the council as RFU council member for Surrey 2 years ago. And I have to say, during that journey, the presence of women has not improved. And frankly, on council, it's woeful. We can do a whole lot better, and the game deserves a whole lot better. So one of the things I'm conscious of is I need to keep the seats warm that I'm currently occupying for talented women coming through. And there are not enough women putting their hands up. It's not that we don't have enough talented women, we just don't have enough women putting their hands up at the moment. And I think the game deserves the very best, and I think the very best is women like us here in this room today. So that's what this is all about. And I hope what we'll be able to do today is be inspired by our two extraordinary speakers. What we're going to do is we'll have a sort of formal bit of the meeting where I'll ask them some questions, just so that you can hear about what got them all started on their volunteer journey and where that's taken them. Then I'll open up and anybody can ask questions, including anybody who might be online joining us. And then it will be much more informal, and it's an opportunity just to chat, to meet new people. I would encourage you to sort of go and meet some new people, because there's some really fabulous people here that have done some really interesting things, which I know you'll find interesting and hopefully a little bit inspiring. I would say that there is an opportunity that, because we've got a published author in the room, Sue's very kindly brought along a supply of her books, so if you wanted to benefit from a signed copy, then you can buy that.
Christmas coming soon.
But what I really hope is that you'll find this network a source of inspiration, a source of support, and most of all, a really good source of enjoyment. So thank you very much, and let me introduce our two speakers. I'm going to stand up, because I just sort of feel a bit better standing up, but don't feel the need to stand up as well, and I'm conscious of the fact that people can see me that way. She worked in sports marketing and PR for over 30 years. During that time, she was incredibly part in sport and other physical activity. And she's had all the clients that you would expect, sports governing bodies, teams, charities, major events and brands. But now she's got the most amazing CV. She's an author. She's the CEO of Fearless Women and the Women's Sports Collective, and that's a network for women who work in the sports sector. She hosts a podcast called Game Changers. haven't finished yet, there's more to come. She was a founding trustee of the Women's Sports Trust, she's a member of the RFU Diversity and Advisory Group, and I hope was nodding when I said commitment from the RFU is as strong now as it's ever been. She's also a trustee of Lewis Football Club and Leisure Focus, which is a not-for-profit charitable incorporated organisation working with local communities and supporting clubs and organisations and individuals.
More than I did about it.
I've taken a note out of your book, but didn't research. In 2018, she received an MBE for her services to grassroots and women's sport, very well deserved. And recently, in fact, I think it was very recently, she was shortlisted for the new Changemaker category in the Sunday Times Sports Women of the Year Awards. So delighted to welcome Sarah Orchard. Her love of rugby showed at a very early age when she founded a women's rugby team at Exeter School. She joined in the sixth form and was one of only 12 girls, I think.
Yeah, it's quite hard to put a 15 out of 12 year, but yeah.
So collaboration, which we're all good at, was brought to bear at an early age. She worked for local radio in Devon, where she started by reading the traffic reports, and she attributes her career progression through to BBC Sports reporter to two things: sticking to deadlines and thorough research. As one of the BBC's youngest sports reporters, she covered the 2010 and 2014 Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Sochi and Singapore. She's a qualified rugby coach and referee, and she made history in November 2016 by becoming the first woman to be a lead commentator on an international rugby match. Sarah. Right, so I'm going to ask some questions, and then there's an opportunity for you to do that, but this is just to get the ball rolling, really. If you want to grab anything to eat or drink while we're doing this, it's really informal, so please feel free to do that. Just keep the noise levels down so that we can actually hear what our speakers have got to say. So, Sue, let's cut to your book, shall we? So, and I'm going to quote from this. Your book, Game On, charts the unstoppable rise of women's sport with many trailblazing women leading the charge. So on a really kind of positive note, you've been part of that trailblazing. So just talk us through the good stuff that's happened, and then perhaps we can get onto the slightly knottier subject of what's not happened yet. So what are the most important positive changes you've seen?
I think probably in the last, even the last 5 or 10 years, I think, I'm conscious of the audience I've got here and Sarah as well here, so if she'll pick my brain anything wrong. But I think for me, I guess it's all about investment. I think for years and years I thought it was about visibility. It's about getting, whether it's the women's game of rugby, or women's sport more generally, out to audiences on free-to-air television, I thought was absolutely key, and still is. But actually the bigger shift, I think, is around investment. So the sports bodies and others paying women to play professionally, I think that makes a huge difference. And the sponsors that have come in, so the Barclays, the Vitalities and others, putting proper money into the game. And then it's all those different components. And I guess the infrastructure, so actually the Sport England's code of governance, that big shift in terms of gender balance on boards, I think that then filters down too. So I think it's not, I think for a long time I thought it was primarily visibility, but actually that funding. And the other thing I would say that I think we've seen the biggest difference even in this last 2 or 3 years, we've always had that successful women's sport where we've had this major, Olympics, Paralympics, World Championships, and we all watch women's sport and we know that female athletes are brilliant. But when we come back, there isn't that domestic week to week, and I think that's where we've seen that shift. With the 100 this summer, with WSL now on free-to-air television, with the Allianz Premier 15s, hard to watch but getting easier to find. But that quality of domestic sport, so I think for me that's probably those things together that have made the biggest shift that we've seen.
And if we sort of break the sports field down into players and administrators and professionals, would you differentiate between those sectors or add any more sectors and say actually you've got to get one of those moving first, or have they all got to move forward at the same time?
They do move together. And the Women's Sport Trust charity has done a huge amount in the last 10 years around visibility and funding into elite sport. So with that belief that actually that top end, it will inspire, if you can't see it, you can't be it, and it will inspire others, women and girls to take part in sport. And I do think without doubt that is really important, that profile. But actually, it's about, I've got three teenage and one older than teenage now, daughters, and actually it's about access to the game, equality in clubs. It's about what happens. I spoke at a primary school last week, and even watching in the playground before I went to speak to them, boys kicking the footballs around, the girls sat on the side. So I think it's at all those levels. So for me, I think the elite side is really important, but actually it's across the whole of the sport that things need to change and shift.
And what made you decide that now is the moment, after all that you've done, to write a book?
I think I always had a book. I think I always thought I would write a book. I'm sure many people similarly feel like you've got a book in you. I thought it would be a novel. I thought I'd write a fiction book, was what I thought I would do. I studied English and sports science actually at university, so they're bringing together those two things. But it almost came on the back of the Game Changers. The podcast now is 8 series, and I know there are some around here that I do know that do listen to the Game Changers. So the podcast, I get to talk to these amazing, trailblazing women in sport. And my idea for the book was that it would bring together those stories as a book. And I spoke to an agent at the time who said, actually, it would be better to do it this way, to follow your journey, to look at the history, to follow your journey, to understand why we've seen these changes. So it's full of stuff from the Game Changers, but it's not the story of the Game Changers. And I guess I wrote it because it felt like the right time to write it. I was slightly worried as I was writing it, and we went into lockdown and COVID, and women's sport kind of stopped and was cancelled, and I thought, oh, crap. I've written this book about the unstoppable rise, and actually it might be quite different when we come out the other side. But as it happens, I feel that we're ever more positive in terms of we've had these conversations. There's so many amazing deals that have been done, broadcast deals, commercial deals. Some really big shifts that have happened even in the last 6 months. So actually it does feel like it is the right time. And Emma Radicani really helped me as well too, so I'm grateful for that. So it does feel like we've come on the back. It's been a good time.
I really enjoyed it, and I also found that there was real kind of depth in it. So I mean, obviously my interest was rugby, but you've drawn from so many different sports, haven't you? I was quite struck, because it's sort of where I am at the moment, about the chapter on women on boards, where you make the point that this is not about having women's voices to help drive women's sport, although that's great. It's a more general point about diverse boards. And if you don't have diverse boards, you don't manage risk well enough, because if you have just people from the same backgrounds and the same opinions, they reinforce the decisions. And I thought you were really honest about how you yourself, when you set up your PR agency, you found yourself in that kind of
perpetual
seeing people and recruiting people. So what helped you get out of that? What made you think that diversity was really important?
Yeah, I actually don't know whether I genuinely woke up and thought, actually, I need not to do this anymore. And the point being, it was an agency full of women. There were 15 women, and many of the women had been to the same university as me. Some had studied the same course as me. And I guess looking back on it now, I can see why men in sport just keep perpetually appointing themselves, or younger versions of themselves. It's because I believed that actually they would do a fantastic job, because I knew I had done a good job, and I was good at PR and comms, and actually if they had the same background, why would they not be exactly the same? So I can kind of understand the rationale for thinking, that homologous, whatever it is, appointment will do well. I think what happened for me is we eventually found some fantastic young men within the organisation, and it really changed and shifted not just how we operated and functioned as an organisation, but also, and I've heard some stuff recently around this, it's not just about getting women on board to change that risk and how the board functions with women around it, but also how men then behave with women in the room and with more than one woman in the room. So actually their attitude and behaviour will change too, and I think as an agency, we probably changed rather than it being, it was never bitchy, but it was 12, 15 women who knew the same thing, who knew where we were coming from, we had the same attitudes. So having two or three, absolutely. And having 2 or 3 young men, I really enjoyed that difference, the balance that it then created. But I didn't realise I had been doing exactly the same thing myself all those years.
Yes. I think boards is about diversity of all sorts of things, and we've just been lucky enough to appoint our first black chairman at the RFU, and he comes from a different background, and he's had different life experiences, and so we're now having different conversations on the board. It's fantastic. So one point from your book that I thought would really resonate with women here tonight is the importance of role models. So I wanted to talk a bit like that. So if you can see somebody like you, whether it's somebody of your age, somebody of your gender, or somebody of your ethnicity doing well, you have solid evidence, really. You've got something there that's possible. So I wanted to ask you about your role models. I might ask you as well, just to tip you off on that one. And what other support really helped you take the next step at the important points in your career? Because I think that's something everybody in this room will probably identify with. There are those points where you think, can I, should I? And we're interested to learn from one another, I think, what kind of helps you say yes to that.
Yes, I might not have a good answer, not got a good answer for this, but I was trying to think about that whole role modelling, and I think I'd probably take lots of things from different people rather than having specific role models in mind. There's definitely women across my career that I've never been mentored, but have been friends, and I've really respected them, and I've watched what they've done and tried to perhaps emulate that. So I think there's been an element of that in my career. I think it's probably a little bit different in that I work from 26, I set up my own agency, so I wasn't answerable to anyone, so I think we looked at other female entrepreneurs that have been out there doing something similar in that space. So probably where I've seen the most role models recently is interviewing the game changers, is talking to amazing women like Sally Mundy at UK Sport and Tony Thompson, and athletes and administrators and coaches. I think every time I talk to, I'm very privileged to talk to amazing women across sport and learning from their experiences and seeing what they've done. So I almost feel I've been more inspired by the role models I've probably seen in the last 5 years than even when I was younger growing up, I think.
Was there a point which took you to setting up your own agency is quite a big sort of step forward? Was there something there that made you think, I can do this?
I've been redundant. I worked for Quaker Oats. I worked for Gatorade, the American sports drink. So I left university. I worked for Cadbury's for 2 years. I was a sales graduate for Cadbury's. And
Did you get chocolate?
It's so popular. I had a boot full of chocolate. I was going out with a lovely guy who was a rugby player who was at Cambridge at the time. I used to roll up at the weekend, open my boot, it's full of cream eggs and whatever chocolate. Yeah, it's very popular. So I worked for Cadbury's for 2 years, and then I worked for Gatorade, the American sports drink, because they were going to launch over here. I'm sure people do know Gatorade, don't they? So, and then they didn't launch. They chose to go to other countries and make other choices. So actually, having had this amazing job, which was a bit of my dream job at the time, travelling the world and doing all the sports marketing, it finished. So I set up the agency because it was all at the time. People said, oh, you're very brave, but the alternative was I'd go and get another job. So it wasn't really as high risk at the time. And then did that for 26 years. Yeah, so it was that made me do it, but it didn't feel brave. It just felt like I'll give it a go and see where it takes me.
That's not a bad mantra.
Yeah.
I think I've done a bit of that. You've got, it's a very practical book. I mean, it's a very rich book in terms of the number of sports that you cover, but it's very practical as well. And at the end, you've got the 10 steps we can take to, so that we can all influence change going forward.
Yeah.
I don't, we'll be here all night if you go through all 10, because there's so much depth in it. But pick a few out for us, and things that you think are going to really resonate with our audience tonight.
Actually, you asked me before, I thought what I could do with the whole thing on each of these. Number one is call out the media when you see unequal coverage. It's not down to you, Sarah. And praise them when they get it right. I think that's something I have done a lot of in the past, is not doing it all the time. I'm a hugely positive person. I like to celebrate positive signs, and I think we don't get on by finger wagging and chastising people. But there are times, and actually, really interesting yesterday, being Sunday Times, Sportswoman of the Year, next week they're going to do the big spread in the paper and whatever. They announced it yesterday online. There's no coverage in the Sunday Times of women's sport yesterday. There's one piece about a female jockey and appalling bullying that she's experienced. But other than that, you look through the whole of the Sunday Times, there's no women's sport. So I did think yesterday, well, actually I could get online and chat about it, but it didn't quite feel appropriate as they've just shortlisted me for an award. Might not help me, mightn't it? Actually, it's quite funny. I've been longlisted. Actually, a separate thing. I've been longlisted for the William Hill Sportsbook of the Year, which is really lovely, and I'm now being shortlisted. And John Inverdale's on that shortlisting board, and he's mentioned a few times in this book. So
not always in a complimentary light.
He's never very complimentary of him. So I'll be interested to see if he actually reads the book, or whether I get through to be in this shortlisting stage too. So yeah, I think it's calling it out, but doing it at the right times in the right places. But I think, we've all got a voice, we're all influencers, so actually making that voice known and amplifying when you see other people having issue with things, I think that's really important. So that would be one of them. And then I guess there's a couple here about asking brands about where they their balance in sponsorship and supporting the brands that support women's sport. And there was some research out last week from the Space Between agency that showed a massive difference in the response that the sponsors of women's sport get from fans to the sponsors of men's sport. And we're not saying that the fans of women's sport are women, because it's equal split male and women, and it's similar for men's sport. But people that are fans of women's sport are like 30 times more likely to remember, to recommend, and to buy the products of those sponsors. So that kind of data is really important. And it's true. I know I'm now on the board of Lewis FC, the only club in the world to equally invest in its male and female teams. But actually, when they got Lyle and Scott on as a sponsor, before I was ever involved with them last Christmas, I bought loads of stuff from Lyle and Scott. So I was really pleased that they'd gone to support this fantastic football club. So I do think that that's that kind of for supporting those sponsors too. Shall I do one more? I've got one more, okay, which is, I guess, standing up for the female athletes and broadcasters and social media, help close down those trolls. And this is there's quite a lot in the book about male allies, and I think that's as much for us to amplify and stand in and step in where we see that social media abuse or we see negativity. And I think when I put my 10 points here, it was as much, probably more, for men really than it is for women too really. So I think that's a key part there.
And lastly, you say you wanted this to be a joyful book, acknowledging all that's been accomplished, as well as a rallying cry for action for the future. So what would you want this group of women to take away as a rallying cry for the future? What would you say?
I think we just said it a bit before then, but it is about that whole knowing that you are influencers, that we do all have impact, and whether that's at home with our families and how we talk about sport and how we listen to sport, or how we celebrate what we see. So I do think together there is I spoke to recently about being it was a woman, one of the sports, a football agent actually, that I spoke to recently, but she has this kind of vision. It's a bit like that advert for Unite all those years ago, when all the little ants go into, she talked about a bug's life, where they suddenly realise, actually, we're huge, we can have impact. And I think as women within sport, actually, we are half the population, that if we don't really stand for it, we do have power, we do have the power to create change and so on. So I think it's almost like supporting each other and doing things together that we really can make a difference.
Absolutely what this network is all about. Brilliant. Thank you, Sue.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Well, sorry, plenty of time now.
I know, I've been making notes.
So your love of rugby, obviously established early on, and not only did you set up this women's team at Exeter, you went to the World Cup in 2003, and you went to the final, didn't you?
I did. So me and my best mate, who played rugby together at uni, graduated in 2003. We could have gone off and done a gap year straight away, or we just went and worked through the whole summer. I was in a box factory when Harry Potter books were only 5, because they hadn't finished yet, doing this on a conveyor belt for 12 hours at a time to pay for my tickets to Australia so we could go. And it was just amazing, as you can only imagine. So yeah. But
at that point, you were still a player and you were selected for the Women's Academy. But what then made you switch your focus to refereeing? What made you go down that route?
2 things. I know very well there's a table of a lot of very good rugby players here, so I know when I say the name Danielle Waterman, you will all nod your heads. I got into the England Academy when I was about 19, 20, and Danielle Waterman was about 15, 16. And when someone is that young and that talented and running circles round you repeatedly, and you're just going, okay, she's got it, I don't. And I just knew at that moment, and I was like, I'm okay, but I'm not that. She was just off the scale. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm not going to go as far as I'd like. And also coming back from the World Cup, I was like, I had such an amazing time. Rugby had given me friendship, it had given me experiences. I was like, I want to be involved, but I can't commit to a team, so let's try it refereeing.
Okay, and how did that go?
I loved it. I've refereed here at Richmond a few times. I haven't done the women's team, sorry. But there is time.
I think I have. I'm just going to keep my head down.
Well, it's funny because the first red cards, I think, and the only red cards I ever gave out were at London Welsh, where they had a game against Barking. And at this point, I've been refereeing for about 3 years and had never given a red card, and ended up giving out 3 in one game. Luckily, there was an off-duty police officer who was also taking notes whilst I was giving out cards. He went, yeah, they were red cards. all right. So yeah, but I loved it. It was a great way, and you meet amazing people like everyone here tonight. It's fantastic. I couldn't recommend it enough.
And then into broadcasting. So, pretty tough organisation, pretty tough sector to get into. And sports broadcasting, so you're clearly up for a challenge. Just talk us through how you've got into that side of things.
Well, as you said, my degree is actually in journalism, so I always knew that broadcasting was something I wanted to do, so I did the traffic and travel, but you don't just get a job in sports broadcasting, you have to do a bit of graft first. So I got in a lot of trouble for a long time from people in Cornwall because I used to pronounce their place names wrong, giving out the wrong B road and all sorts like that. So I did all of that. Managed to get to BBC Radio Devonsport. That was when Exeter Chiefs used to play at the old ground, at the county ground, before they moved to Sand Park. That was my first dip in the water of doing a bit of rugby. I was like, I love this. Managed to get an attachment at London, managed to get my nose in there, and I was just reading sports bulletins. I wasn't sort of out as a reporter at games regularly until one day my boss turned around and went, "Oh, Sarah, you referee, could you commentate for me?" And I just went, "Can I?" The concept, I'm going back 15 years now, that a woman could commentate on a rugby match, I didn't even think that was even possible. I don't think I'd even heard a woman at this point commentate on a football match, let alone a rugby match. And he was just like, "Yeah, just go and do it." And I was like, "Okay, all right then." And I was quite lucky because it was reasonably well hidden away because we used to do commentaries online of all the clubs. So it was a Wasps game. And yeah, it went out online, and after that he said, "Yeah, you're fine, off you go, carry on." So, and it's just that whole thing, sometimes you don't realise something exists until you meet wonderful individuals who have the forethought to go, "Well, of course you can." And that's what my boss was, and I'll be forever thankful for that opportunity.
You don't strike me as a woman who suffers from self-doubt, but was that a proper sort of self-doubt moment, or was it just that you were a proper trailblazer then, weren't you?
We all have self-doubt, and it's how you manage your self-doubt. I don't think there's anyone here who will talk about imposter syndrome. We're often in a room, we feel we don't belong, we wonder why we've been given an opportunity over someone else, we worry that someone else knows more than us, therefore we don't belong. It's a horrible feeling, but I am always well within the knowledge that men feel like that as well. They're perhaps better at covering it up. I think as women we're just a lot more honest. Sometimes we're too honest at times, and you learn to bluff it a little bit. And sometimes if someone gives you an amazing opportunity, you have to take it. When you talk about role models, I was thinking a little bit, there's a book by Sheryl Sandberg, who's the COO of Facebook. I don't know if she still is actually, I'm not sure. It's called Lean In. And whether you agree with all of her business principles, so on and so forth, she does a great chapter where she talks about job interviews. And she says she'll put up a job interview at Facebook, and she'll know she wants some women to apply for it. And what she'll do is she'll get 10 applicants, all men and 1 woman. And she'll be like, "Well, where's the other 9 women I know who should be applying for this job?" She speaks to the guys will go, "Well, I looked at the job application, I could do half of it, so I thought, I can do this." You ask the women, "Why didn't you apply for the job?" They'll go, "Well, I looked at it, I can only do half of it, I can't do the rest." So you kind of that's how our brains work. And it's that whole thing of, you have to remind yourself of that all the time. If you've been asked to do something, it's because somebody thinks you can do it. And I remind myself of that all the time. My bosses would not ask me to do the job if they didn't think I could do it. So.
I think you're right about the sort of point of honesty, and I think I'm going to ask you to tell the chip story, because I think it's a really good example of how you can look. Sometimes you can look at people and think, "God, they're amazing, aren't they? They must have had this sort of silver career projection." But actually, we've all made mistakes along the way. And I think people being honest enough, as you were, to share that story it helps, because it makes us realise we're all human.
I've made 2 big mistakes in my career. One is that I once turned off the whole of BBC Radio Devon, the whole county, said shit into a microphone, realised what I'd done, then switched it back on again. Luckily, the bosses weren't listening that day. Don't ask me how I got away with that, but I did. But the story you're talking about was I got some work experience at Sky Sports. And this was amazing work experience with the rugby team at rugby matches. And they said, "Right, so we're going to send you on a test match to go and do the reporting, and you can do the interviews, we'll use it." And I was like, "Okay, great, brilliant." So I went along with this producer and cameraman. It was to an Exeter Chiefs game, and they said, right, Sarah, so you go and settle yourself in for the game. We're going to do the filming around the game. Great. So I thought, well, what shall I do? I went and bought them chips whilst the game was on. I wasn't watching the game. I didn't watch any of it. And I came to them about 20 minutes into the game, having been in a massive queue to buy this producer and this cameraman chips, and said, oh, I've got some chips for you. And they were like, okay. And it's like, that's not what you're meant to be doing. I didn't know. You know, it sounds like a really simple thing that a sports reporter should know, that you're at a game to watch the game. But no, I thought I wanted to be a female. I wanted to please the people I was with. And by pleasing them, I was buying them hot chips on a cold day. I got it completely wrong. It wasn't a disaster, but you learn from these mistakes. And I'm happy to say that I was not on my game that day. And I still have a wonderful job now. But yeah, if you're on work experience with Sky to watch a game, don't buy them chips.
Excellent life lesson. I want to ask you a bit about social media, because we're operating in a very different world now, and I think it puts a lot more pressure on us all, but I think it probably puts a lot more pressure on women in particular. How have you found kind of coping with the trolling side of being a female sports reporter and commentator?
Trolling, there's two sides of trolling. There's what I call threat, and then there's just insults. I'm lucky I've never personally been threatened. I've had colleagues who have been threatened, and I'm lucky that I work in an organisation where the BBC takes that very seriously, and everyone, male or female, is very well looked after. I have been insulted, and I have to say, I don't care. And it's, you know, I can guarantee to you, I can do any game on the TV or radio, and someone somewhere will write, either directly or indirectly, this woman doesn't know what she's talking about, my dog's howling, you know, her voice is too high-pitched, you know, it's the same old patter. Why do women have to work on men's sport? Why can't they just work on women's sport? I honestly don't care. I really couldn't care less. And why should I care about what they think? The only people I care about what they think about my job are my bosses, because they're going to employ me again, and my family and my partner, my husband. So that's all I care about, and no one else, honestly, really doesn't touch the sides.
I wish I was the same. I have to say I'm remarkably thin-skinned, and I've spent my whole life trying to develop a thick skin, and it's just something at the end you sort of think, oh, I'm just going to have to learn to live with it. It's part of what I am.
Don't. The other thing I would say is don't ever look for it.
No,
The first time I did it in 2016. First thing I did was I got out of Twickenham, and I was there, you know, as you do, scrolling through Twitter, going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And actually, most of it was love and appreciation, which was amazing. But, you know, it's a very natural human thing. You can have 100 messages that say you've done a brilliant job, but it just takes that one that says you didn't. Yeah. That's the one you're going to hold on to for the whole night, for the rest of the week, and make you feel bad and think you can't do it. You forget about the other 100. So I don't really look at my phone after any games. I might the next day, but I don't look at it on the day. Don't need it.
Sensible. I want to talk to you a bit about the quality of the women's game, because I think it's something the RFU is, you know, quite rightly focused on. And one of the things I really liked about Tommy Luby was at our very first RFU board meeting, he said, I care about three things. I care about winning, I care about well-being, and I care about women. I went, you know, this is somebody who's, you know, really going to make a difference. The sort of the aspiration that we've put out there is that the RFU wants to make the professional game commercially successful. So it wants to make the game good enough that it does what the professional game does for the men, which is put money back into the grassroots. And it wants to fill Twickenham for a women's international. And we've said, we want to do that within 5 years. Now, you know that as a broadcaster, you have to get product right in order to then get the broadcasters interested in it. And thank goodness we've got the BBC now signed up for the Red Roses games, which I think is a great step forward. But in your professional opinion, is that aspiration achievable?
Yes, England's women, I have been saying for years, should have a standalone fixture at Twickenham. And I do believe if it is marketed correctly, right time, right place, it will sell it out. But it has to be right.
Yeah.
And there's also this big discussion that Sue's probably better at than me talking about is how you market women's sport. It is not a man's sport, therefore doing what you do for the men's match, you shouldn't be doing it for the women's match, because if you particularly want to invite more female fans in, female fans have different needs. For instance, my favourite person here this evening is Hayden at the back, who's, I think, about to have some dinner. And the fact that you are all supporting that Hayden is here and that Mum can be here as well, you know, rugby needs to get better at that, you know. I have been into Twickenham, Murrayfield, Stadio Olimpico with a breast pump and just gone, where do I go? I don't know what to do. And nobody else knows because no one else is doing it. No one else is talking about it unless we have more women on boards. You can go, right, where's the breastfeeding room? If we can get more women in here, this is where they need to go. You know, if you ever go to Oxford Street, John Lewis is packed because it's got the best breastfeeding room ever in all the shops. It's really nice, really pleasant, comfy chairs. I spent a fortune in there because there was a breastfeeding room. You know, it's simple things like that that make a difference and will help it take the next step.
Yeah. One last question I'm going to ask you both, because it's something I think you brought up in your book, and it's something I'm kind of thinking about quite a lot at the moment. And that's, you know, there's men's sport and there's women's sport. But when it comes to looking at the audience for these and looking at the fans, is it the case that there are women, do we think the way to market this successfully is say, okay, it's women who are interested in women's sport and it's men who are interested in men's sport? Because I don't think that's true. But I have been told this at quite a senior level, that is the way the world is, and I don't think it is the way the world is. So,
and the research, that's one of the things I think it's lovely that we're seeing all this research coming out. So the research last week from Sky Sports at Leaders Week was really showing that 25%, that those men that were questioned have watched 25% more women's sport in the last 18 months than they did before, and 21% of the population are watching more women's sport than they had before. So it is men watching women's sport, and also women are huge fans of men's sport too, as we know. So it's sort of naive, but I think it is a naive, but it's kind of a natural. And I think sometimes we get confused about women's sport, women in sport, fans of women's sport. There is almost that assumption it's a female thing. It's not a female. It's definitely a very different thing. And I think I do a lot of work with the women's football, and definitely the feel and the crowd and the audience and the family friendliness and all that stuff is so different to the men's game. And I don't think there is much of that disparity in rugby, and maybe cricket's kind of a bit in between the two of those. So it's a different feel to the audience and the spectators. They're more family friendly, but not as clear cut as men and women at all.
yeah, I have to say I was blown away by the 100 because I found myself watching women's cricket, and for some reason I don't know why I hadn't, but I hadn't.
Yeah.
And the skill level was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. So, you know, do we have to kind of get over the fact that there's a sort of group of people who say no, it's women want to watch women's sport and men want to watch men's sport, and never the twain?
Yes, completely. I mean, but that's it. Yes, it's a different product, but it can be enjoyed by all. And I think the really obvious one and the easy hit is always when you talk about the Solheim Cup. I mean, my husband has been sat watching Solheim Cup for years. He always thinks it's fantastic. He's very jealous of how far they can all drive, and their short game is far better than his. So, it appeals to everyone. I don't think this differentiation has to be there. When I'm talking about issues about breastfeeding, I'm talking about removing barriers to make more people included.
Yes, and I think tennis has got over it, hasn't it? I mean, tennis has always been the case. If you go to the big matches and you go to Wimbledon, there'll be equal crowds for the women doing really well because they're showcasing their skill at the sport, and they've just got there, haven't they? I think not all the sports are quite there yet.
Yes.
And that's 50 years ago of fighting for equal prize money in tennis.
Billie Jean King has something to do with it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Brilliant. Sarah, you want to make something? Thank you very much. Right, over to you now. I give you Sarah.
I reply to Sarah. I don't
Sarah and Sue. Questions?
Covered it all.
Don't be shy.
Not necessarily around RFU, but there's been a lot of focus with the Welsh Rugby Union at the moment. What do you think we could do as a neighbouring union, perhaps, where we're kind of leading the way, especially in the home nations, to help or guide or sort of steer the Welsh in the right way? Because I mean, we need it for Six Nations quality. Because at the moment, there's kind of a massive disparity between the quality of rugby in the home nation. So,
the Welsh women need to feel loved, and I think the WRU has come out quite openly with Nigel Walker coming in, and they've made their apologies, and as outsiders all we can hope is that things are going to change. Nothing's going to change overnight, but yeah, I think what the Welsh women really need is to know they are supported and they are wanted. Their attendances they've recently had for matches. As we come out of COVID, I think if they are well supported, that's going to make a big difference. There has to be an acceptance that when they play, because they are quite a long way behind, you are going to see a few cricket scores for a few more years. That has to be accepted. But that doesn't mean you have to turn around and say they're not very good. Actually, for the standard they're playing at, they're fantastic. And for the facilities and the support they've been given, they're brilliant. They just need to be supported. By quite a few former Welsh internationals to really support what the Welsh women are doing away from the WRU. It's in no way endorsed by the WRU, but just little things like that, saying that you're listening, anything along those lines, show you care.
And I think you made the point, Sue, that actually what you really have to do before you do anything else is invest.
Yeah.
So is it the case that actually, as well as showing you care, but the WRU has got to put its money where its mouth is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the RFU is doing fantastic things here, but there's still more and more that individual clubs could be doing. And so I think it's the same across rugby. It's the same across sport more broadly, really. I think sometimes we do hear these things said, but when it comes to the nitty-gritty on a club level of access to pitches and investments on and kit and all those things that everyone in the room here probably knows and has experience too, it's how it trickles down as well as the words that are said at the highest level.
Yeah. I was quite struck by the fact, Laura, I was having this conversation about what the aspiration was here at Richmond for the women, and obviously the women's. But when you were in the Premiership, did it feel like you were the senior club here? That you were the senior team?
No, not at all. And I think there's still a lot of ground to make, and that wasn't with the Tyrrell's rebranding, the Premier 15's rebranding 6 years ago. That wasn't something that was new to us. We were already, despite the fact that we were the most successful women's team, not even us, it's taken a lot of door banging, stamping of feet in certain cases, to sort of really get our voices heard, and for that justice to be heard and to be corrected. And with it's still a slow rolling thing, and it's constant sort of little victories. There's still a long way to go. It's frustrating, we still have to have those conversations, but by maintaining that conversation, maintaining those questions and making sure that we're continually challenging and asking is probably the most important thing, is making sure we're not going away. And from their perspective, I say they, the men's perspective, the problem won't go away just because you give us a time a little bit more, and that's the really important thing.
I think it's disappointing that there's a sort of circular argument, isn't there, where, and I hear people say this, that well, why should we invest in it, because we won't get a commercial return? And I feel like saying, and I quite often do say, well, you won't get a commercial return if you don't invest in it.
Exactly. You've got to be in it to win it, sort of thing. So when that was whilst we're arguing back, is well, we're paying the exact same membership as let's put the men's first team on a different parity at the moment, but we're paying the same membership as the men's second team. So at least puts us on the same benchmark as them, as a starting point. And that was something they didn't really come back and argue with. And it was, well, actually, yeah, she's got a point. And the rest of us behind us have a point. So things start to change. But particularly that, with the women's game, we're at level 2 now, but we're not in the Premiership. The men are level 2. So now the conversation is, well, why have we been given the same level 2? Make it even. It's the same sports. At the end of the day, we're paying the same membership fees, the same involvement. I think we just have to keep having that conversation.
Is that what you expected us to respond with in terms of or do you have your own view on what we can and should do?
I think I'm probably in the same wavelength, especially with our club as well. We're obviously lower level than Richmond, but we're only down the road in Barnes, and whilst we get a lot of support that has improved over the last few years, there's still that massive gap that we're quite lucky there's a few of us that are definite voices that are happy to kind of continue that. But it's a frustration I think we probably all have to deal with sometimes, that the conversations shouldn't be happening all the time, but they do.
I hope there's some examples. Like I said, I wear my Lewis FC hat about equal investment in male and female, and then sponsors coming in that would never have come into the sport if it was just men's, but they come in because it's women's, and sponsors attracted by a lot of the women's sport offers. But, and I don't know all the politics of it, but it was fantastic to see some of the Bristol Bears coverage recently of them celebrating their access to, because it is about money and funding and paying, but also S&C and access to pitches and kit and clothing and all. So I think as we see more of that, I would hope some more clubs that then, as that ripples out, you can see they've invested in their women's game and actually look at the result of it, not just the feel good and the support of the fans and stakeholders and everything, but actually the quality of play and the commercial opportunities that come in too. So I guess it's good to be amplifying those stories for others to see as well.
I would beat the drum as well for administration. I mean, it may sound a bit dull, but but those are where the decisions are being made. So if you're not in the committee rooms and you're not in the boardrooms, then your voice will not be heard. So if you're thinking about what to do when you get to the end of playing, or even you're thinking about what to do while you're still playing, please do think about joining the administration, because that's where these decisions are being made.
That's why it's really important that the Sport England, the revised Treaty of Governance, about having that level of representation on boards, that it stems from the clubs. So I sit on as an independent member on 2 RFU subgroups, and one of them is the international ticketing, and talking about filling Twickenham, but it's getting kind of the information, data from the clubs. But you've got all the clubs within England run by the same people, all thinking the same way. No one wants to share the information, where their ticket money is going, where their tickets are going, etc. And actually, if we can get that information and actually getting different viewpoints on those committees, that's where the change will happen. You know, that's why you, through the D&I work, through the implementation and the advisory, is setting the standards for a lot of other governing bodies that are thinking about D&I work.
Oh, absolutely. Well said. Other questions? Anything? Do we have anything online, Sue?
Oh, we've got 150 people have been engaged with us.
Oh, wow. But not one of them's asked
Probably the
questions.
same person, just dropped me in now. But never mind, we'll take that. No, there was just a few comments around. I agree that the women's game deserves the same airplay as at the home of rugby with the White campaign. I believe we've had a very successful day. Roses having a standalone fixture would be fantastic going forward for many young girls who play the game, that they're actually seeing a change in the game. So it's quite a lot of support for that.
Fantastic.
And it's not just the Welsh that we should be looking at. Look at Ireland as well. That's from London Irish, I think.
Yeah. One of my observations is at grassroots level that we're not doing enough to make it an equal sport when children are under 12 or under 11. It is still incredibly male dominated. The coaches are all men. It's not inclusive. It's not diverse. And it doesn't. We're not. If there is funding, we're not using it in the right way. And the only way we're going to grow the sport, and the only way grassroots clubs are going to survive, is to bring young girls in, because they're maxed out on the boys, and the boys' numbers are declining. And I guess the question is, what are we doing about that? What's the RFU doing about that? And how do we change that?
Sue, do you want to start? Because I think you've got some stuff in your
I was going to say, why do you think that we are? Why do we think, in terms of coaching, because obviously there are coaches coming through and coaching, so why do you think there are not more female coaches coming through? Because they don't feel welcomed?
Yeah, I think there's a lack of inclusion, and inclusion is about making people feel welcome. I think there are a lot of very strong-willed men coaching who can't see that there's necessarily another way. I don't think we're doing justice to our boys, because I don't think they're growing up playing sport in the world that they will have to go into. And it just feels like when I played sport in the 80s, 70s and 80s, it doesn't feel like it's really moved on. And it's quite sad, because we see girls who turn up, they're under 11, there isn't maybe a girls' team for them, and they walk away again and they never play the sport again. And it just feels culturally at a lot of, not all clubs, but culturally maybe we have it wrong at some of the clubs.
It's something I repeatedly hear, both from my own daughters, so one has gone on, one's now playing down at Sussex she's captain of Sussex University team actually,
Excellent.
but playing down at Sussex Uni, and did fight her way through Windsor to whatever. But my youngest actually stopped because at Windsor there wasn't enough players. So the same old story, and I do repeatedly, anecdotally, but repeatedly hear the same stories of they couldn't quite get a team together. And you think that's almost 10 years ago, and that still is happening now. I don't know. It's good to have that, I guess, clarified and hear that again. But I don't have the answer as to how we change that, but I know that we do need to change that, and that we're talking about 30% of the global population of rugby is female, and it's, where are those females in terms of from youngsters coming into the sport here? So I don't have the answer for that, but absolutely I think coaches on the ground are welcome.
It feels like a condition of coaching if you are a player who wants to coach it, the flow through that we need, but also it's just in this day and age it's wrong.
I think everything you've said is really, really interesting, and there is just a very natural cultural shift that hopefully things like this will change. People are becoming far more acceptable of women being in sporting atmospheres. It's fascinating what you guys are talking about, your clubs, in particular around you're still having to bang on doors. Hopefully this is going to change over time in the acceptance that we are all have a big commercial value. You talked about sponsors purely in one sex anymore. They want to appeal to everyone. They are going to go, well, do you have a women's team? Why not? They will ask those questions on our behalf. That is coming. But that's what the clubs have to be aware of moving forward. When it comes to the actual coaching itself, I've done level 1 and level 2. I don't remember any discussions in level 1 or level 2 coaching about the differences about bringing on younger male or female players. When I did my refereeing, we are going back 20 years. Yes, I know, I can't be. I do remember, I think it was when I joined the London Society, so I'm looking at it this way now, we were sent away for a weekend as a group of female young referees from across the whole country, where we all came together. It was just, I don't even think it was like selection, it was just there were so few of us. We all got to go, and it was brilliant. I mean, I remember in particular Claire Hodnett was there as well, who's now one of the television match officials who does in the Premiership. So that experience alone, just being with other like-minded referees, really helps spur me on. And I think maybe in coaching, maybe there's some more opportunities to have direct female funding for coaching, but the area around the differences of coaching between men and women, I am no expert, but maybe you can bring that up in the next board meeting.
I know that there's a lot of work going on in Surrey at the moment to make these courses available, coaching courses and refereeing courses. I suspect one of the issues you're referring to is how we kind of get women to put themselves forward,
And also
thinking they can.
How we get men to recognise that girls are being treated differently by the other boys. The ball gets passed over them, they're not included, the girls are always on the sideline. It's really stark, it's really obvious in a lot of cases that, and girls are often a bit more timid, they're a bit more, I can only do 50% of it, and the boys are going to flatten everyone. And it's just about how you build that team and you create that. And I know that, we're relying on volunteers and we're very grateful to them. It's not an easy task, and not everybody wants to get up on a Sunday morning and it's January and to do it. But I do think there's something about just starting to have that conversation and starting to make people aware that how you're coaching 5 or 6 years old through to 11 is impacting how girls are coming through.
So do you hear?
Yeah, I've been a coach for the last 8 or 9 years. Started coaching mixed at under 7s, I think, and now I'm doing the girls under 15s. And so yes, I had a daughter who didn't want to be the only girl on the pitch, so I had to be on the pitch with her, so I decided to start coaching. And I've not stopped. She probably want me to stop now that she's working. I'm a bit cringe, but I own that. Totally own it. But what I'm finding now is that the RFU guys, any men or women within the RFU, are absolutely amazing. With women coaches, and I've just done my refereeing course as well, amazing. But it's not translating to a lot of the guys at the rugby club. Some of the club I'm at, I'm finding quite good, but when we have away games or joint training, the other coaches assume. I don't know if it's my accent or my gender, probably both in combined don't help. but I get left on the side, and the men take over, to the point where some of the girls have commented on it, and it's exhausting having to fight it. But what I do find is the younger men are a lot better. And so, like, where we're talking about diversity on the boards, get the men who are in their 30s or on their 20s, and those are the allies. The dinosaurs who are at 40s and 50s, I'm in my 40s, I've been called 40s dinosaurs. But seriously, the men in the 40s and 50s are exhausting. They're honestly exhausting. Whereas if you talk to the guy, or you do an eye roll to some of the men who are in their 30s, and they're like, yeah, sorry, he's just, let him die out, and we're coming. So I want to say, I think it is some of that, is to get some of the younger guys more involved, because they do think differently now than the guys who are in their 50s.
I thought you had a really interesting section in your book on your male allies, because you talked about the importance of women helping women, but you also talked about the importance of having male allies. Do you want to say a little bit about
I guess
experience
that's,
of that?
I think we do talk, I do a lot about that whole kind of women supporting women and so on, but actually it's men that are going to make the difference, whether that is as sponsors, as in terms of who makes a decision around media, who makes a decision within many sporting bodies. It's not a rugby conversation here, it's a general FIFA, whatever bodies we're talking about. So having those men on board, and I guess it's how we get them on board, and not just around, say, that whole calling them out and being negative about it, but getting them on board because they see it's the right thing to do for all the reasons we've said, but it's commercial, not just because it is the right thing to do, but also they'll be called out in the future by staff or their stakeholders or others within society too. So I think that importance of male allies can't be underestimated.
So I think that's the point you're making, is it find the men who are going to back you, and get them on, get them to outshout the ones who are dinosaurs. Yes.
To go back to the younger grassroots clubs, I think it just takes one female coach to get it started, because if they're all male, there's no role models, and I feel like the parents, so the coaches that come from parents, are usually dads who feel like they've watched rugby, they know how to coach it. Whereas the females may not have watched it, played it, but they've got a son who wants to play, or their daughter wants to play, and they don't feel like they have the experience to be able to coach. And if they don't see any females doing it, then they just don't think that they can. So from where I coach, I'm the first female coach at the club, so I'm hoping there'll be a few more that join from the parents. But yeah, I think what I've seen is all the male coaches, and they usually they start off as dads, and then they come through like that. But I think getting the females to feel like they can do it.
And you have to believe there must be a shift as young women come through who have played. I was 55 this year. I was at Loughborough with Burgess and Nicky Bonsford. That was my era. I didn't play. I was scared.
I'd be scared of them too.
But that was that was almost like just the beginning of, in that kind of late 80s of women's rugby. So I watched rugby, I watched men's rugby, but not kind of knowing it, not really knowing the rules. So I guess that will have changed, and I think your generation coming through now, we will see more women as parents coming to clubs that have played or been more aware of the game perhaps than they have done in the past. So from a positive point of view, fantastic that you are doing that. Well done. And I guess you've got to hope that others will be coming through that have had a bit more experience of the game themselves and feel confident enough to pick up a whistle and coach.
And another big thing, it's a sidestep from what you've just marked on. You're a very young woman, you're going to grow up, you may have children in the future, you may have a partner who also plays at the club. Rugby clubs have to adapt. If they want to hold on to you, hold on to your partner, hold on to your children, rugby clubs have to be more now than just a pint at the bar with the lads. Because if not, they're going to lose the one lad, and they could have had the whole family, the whole package. And they really have to evolve that. So you are important to hold on to, but rugby clubs have to learn that they have to look after all of you, not just where you are in your life now.
Brilliant. So I've got a question here and then a question there.
It was more of a statement from what you said, really, because there's this thing historically where the dad coaches and mum does the admin. So maybe we need to. So maybe we need to switch those roles a little bit, you know, where there's this assumption that it's the bloke that coaches or referees.
When,
and it's
next
the woman that does that.
next when you're all in your board meetings, go, can we all have a job swap day? You know, suggest it, you know, I'll be president for the day, you can do the oranges, you know, suggest it, see what they say, can say it might be a good way of other people learning what each other do, you know, you just got to sell it in the right way, and then it's also better understanding of what everyone actually gives to the club. It doesn't matter what your role is, it can be admin, it's just as valuable as the person who's the noisy one out on the pitch. It's so important.
But my point is, it's the men again on the pitch with the children rather than the women being on the pitch. So maybe we have to, as rugby clubs, look at that slightly differently.
I think also we all have to be a bit braver.
I do think it's confidence, really, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because I've been on coaching courses with guys and they just don't know what they're talking about. They don't. And you have to bite your tongue. Because, like you said...
You don't bite your tongue.
There's a 50-year-old man who thinks he's played for his whole life and he knows more than absolutely everybody. You just don't do what you have to do. And then you correct it afterwards. And it's about being confident. Like, I think a lot of women are confident enough in themselves to be able to say, no, actually, you're wrong. It should be done this way. In every facet, not just in rugby, but in every facet.
And it's
And
a
really
big
hard
ask,
thing to
isn't it,
do.
to ask women to get more involved and be the administrators and be the people that are running it and guiding everyone through. But you come up, it's not just rocking up and coaching a group that's already there like you do in boys and men's rugby, because you've now got to fight all those battles. It's your responsibility to fight those battles, have those arguments and whatever is needed to try and rally up kids and girls specifically, because they're not there yet, because there's not enough involvement. So there's a lot more to be asked of women that we're trying to, you know, sell this role to. And you know, we're lucky that there's lots of really strong women here, and in Surrey especially, that are happy to do that and have thrived. But it's a really big ask as well. And I guess I don't know what the answer is to that challenge.
The younger male allies is something we have touched on, and hopefully you can all tap into maybe a little bit this evening, just as a start. So.
And that confidence thing too. I meant to mention, we were talking about, we founded last year the Women's Sport Collective. I don't know if people have meant there's the Women's Sport Collective, but a free network for women working across sport, all areas of sport. We've got 3,300 members now from across the world actually. We do online networking, we do educational webinars, sort of personal and professional development. But we did some research, an annual research survey about a month ago, and about 80% of women, the key reason they came to the network was around confidence, was lack of confidence. And I get so frustrated because actually it is about giving women more confidence. I completely understand that, but actually it's about fixing the system so that women's brilliance can shine within it. And I had a really good piece, I read an article just this week around not questioning imposter syndrome, but obviously we know it exists as a thing, but it's more about
Brené Brown was
it was, yeah, that was the very article. It was really interesting. It's absolutely fascinating. That actually, it's that women are, you know, we know that women are brilliant, but brilliant and capable and all those things. And actually, it's the system that imposes that, imposter system that we have, because it makes us feel that we're not quite doing it right. We're not doing it the way that men have done it. We're not, wherever it is, aggressive enough, authoritative enough, or whatever it might be. But actually, we could do it, and we know that we are completely capable of doing it. It's just the way I wouldn't articulate it as well as Brené Brown there, but it's the way in which the system is set up. So actually, she was questioning, or talking to somebody that was questioning whether that really is a thing. We just need to celebrate the fact that we could do it if the system was correct for us. And I think that point around having the confidence to go along to a course definitely helps when there's more of you, and there's more than one of you. I think it's inordinately hard being the only female in a room on a course, level 1, 2, 3, whatever. It's easier when there's more of you together, more allies.
Please do. We talk about a lot of male allies, which is really right and proper, but it's actually been female allies as well, and actually supporting each other.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, I don't think with my friend here, but we were parents standing aside. I used to play rugby at uni, hadn't played for years, so mid-40s. There wasn't really an opportunity to really play it then. That was a really unusual thing, kind of playing in Wales actually, so there you go. But, and it was our daughters that played. My husband doesn't touch rugby, or plays football, and so it was never any kind of involvement
reassurance is the wrong word, but just kind of keep challenging each other.
Which is what this network is all about.
Yeah, there you go.
Right, I think we've probably got time for a few more questions. Anyone from that? The end table over there?
It's a little bit difficult to hear sometimes what's going on over there. So
Well, come and join us.
Leave the air conditioning. Well, I said that maybe we're very lucky, I suppose, in some respects, for all hard work, whatever it might be, or just dedication. But in our club, we have a woman that's the director of rugby. Last season, juniors chair and kids first chair were both women. You know, there's a lot of women within the club on the coaching and the admin side, and we've got now a burgeoning girls section and now a women's section as well. And that's driven by people within the club actually understanding that. I do agree that I've only ever done a coaching course when I'm the only female there. So, and I do think it's promoting that and supporting that, and that will only get better the more the youngsters come through playing their sport, that being their sport. And we've made a big commitment because initially when it started as a girls section, it was almost like a standalone. Well, this is our girls, we're going to wash the bits, we're going to wash our tags, we're going to make our balls all clean. And we're like, no, that's not what it's about. We're part of a club and we're all a club. And so we kind of moved on the head of girls at that time, brought in another head of girls that actually has driven this club. Now, the girls did help design their kit and they chose what they wanted to have on it, and it wasn't just the boys' shaped kit. You know, it was very much dedicated to the girls' shape, and it was their decision to do that. And now we've got under nines, you know, all the way through to the older ones. And it is about having their prime slots. They get the club pitches and others don't. They get the big areas to play, and that's made a big difference, you know, to the deaf. And having festivals at our place as well, and recognising, having internationals down, you know, raising the profile, and having the female international player come down and coach the boys, the juniors as well. So actually sharing that looks really positively too.
What club is that?
We're old Rutlishians, old Ruts in Wimbledon.
And what do you think is the biggest shift that's caused that shift? Is it about having a female president? What do you think's caused the initial?
I think your idea about allies is really worthwhile. We have, you know, yes, we've still got the dinosaurs, I think somebody called them. But yeah, the idea that there are still barriers, but there are enough women and men that support women, and you're not seen as a woman necessarily. You're a coach, or you're the chair, or that you're the director of rugby, whoever you are. You're not necessarily men and women. You know, you're running the club in the way you want to drive it forward.
I think you made the point really well, that this is about the future of rugby as well. Rugby will thrive as a game if it is a game for all. I mean, it's always been very strong on being a game for all shapes and sizes, but it's got to be a game for all ages, a game for all genders. And there are some parts where the game does that brilliantly, and there are some parts where it does it less brilliantly. And I've seen examples of clubs where it's done brilliantly. The clubs have absolutely got it, that this is about being a sort of a community centre that is centred around rugby, but it is for the community, and that is the future of the game. So it's not just a sort of dogmatic thing that we've got to get right. It's about what I feel passionate about, which is helping the game survive, because it's a force for good, and it will survive and thrive if it is a force for good for all. And we've all got to do our bit to get it there.
I love, by the way, what you said about the girls designing their own shirts, because I'm sure you heard last week, credit to the RFU, the women now have their very own England shirt, and I think it looks blimmin' fantastic. It's got gorgeous design around the collar of the thorns and the roses. So things are changing. I mean, it is ridiculous that we're in 2021 and it's the first time women have had their own shirt, but still it's happening and it's brilliant. So.
And they're an alternate shirt as well. They've got a shirt and an alternate, haven't they? Yeah.
The replica's not in men, doesn't come in men.
No.
One step at a time. Hold the small victories.
Twitter doesn't matter, you know, it'd be a bit big here and a good bit tight there. We've been doing that for years.
Yeah, you're open to our world. Yeah.
Can you all join me in thanking our two brilliant speakers, Sue and Sarah? Sue has very kindly brought along her books. I know she will sign them for you. She's even bought the
magic swipe
magic swipe machine, so you don't have to have cash, just your card. Please do stay and eat some of the food. Please do drink. Please do talk to people. And thank you so much for coming. And please do inspire one another, inspire and support one another. And we look forward very much to seeing you next time. Thank you very much. Fantastic.
Right, can you just say hello to your fans online?
Hello, thank you so much for being with us online. You were brilliant. There you go.